Rain swallowed the small town whole. In the chaos, a single mom waded waist-deep through floodwaters, gripping a stranger's arm. She didn't know then. The man clinging to her was a Hell's Angel's father, and her act of kindness would echo louder than any storm. Before we start this story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Also, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us to bring you more inspiring stories every day. The town of Maple Hollow was usually quiet, a place of church bells and corner stores. But when the river burst its banks after 3 days of relentless rain, streets turned into rivers and homes became islands. Rachel Garner, 34, tightened her grip on her 8-year-old son, Evan, as they scrambled onto the second floor of their modest house. She was a single mom, working 2 jobs, barely keeping life afloat even before the storm. Now water seeped through her floorboards, and the sound of neighbors shouting carried through the dark. Rachel wrapped Evan in blankets, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. But then she saw him, a frail older man struggling in the current outside her window, clinging to a fence post, his face twisted with terror. Something inside Rachel surged. She handed Evan a flashlight and climbed into the swirling flood, her heart pounding. She didn't stop to think. She only thought, no one dies tonight if I can help it. The water was icy, pulling at her legs like hands. Rachel pushed forward, teeth gritted, until she reached the man. He coughed, sputtering, his voice hoarse. "Can. Hold on." Rachel wrapped an arm around him. "I've got you." Inch by inch, she dragged him toward the house. The current fought back, but determination burned brighter than fear. Evan leaned from the window, calling, "Mom, hurry!" With one final heave, she got the man onto her porch, collapsing beside him. He was pale, shaking, but alive. She wrapped him in a blanket, pressing a mug of tea into his trembling hands, once the storm eased enough to use her stove. He introduced himself through ragged breaths. "Name's Walter Holt." "Thank you, Mom." Rachel smiled faintly, brushing wet hair from her face. She didn't ask more. Who he was didn't matter. What mattered was that a man who would have drowned had been pulled from the water. What she didn't know was that Walter's name carried weight far beyond Maple Hollow. 2 days later, the water receded, leaving mud, debris, and broken fences behind. Rachel walked Evan to school, both of them exhausted but grateful their house still stood. Walter, now resting with his relatives, had insisted she take his phone number. She thought nothing of it, slipping it into her pocket with a polite nod. Life returned slowly, neighbors repairing porches, sharing stories of loss and survival. Rachel never expected thanks. She had acted because it was the only thing her heart could allow. But that evening, as she swept mud from her porch, she noticed a line of black motorcycles rolling slowly down Maple Hollow's main road. Chrome gleamed in the setting sun, and the sound of engines rumbled like distant thunder. Evan's eyes widened. "Mom, who are they?" Rachel froze, broom in hand, as the bikes pulled up right outside her yard. 100 riders dismounted in unison. At the front stood a towering man with a leather vest. His eyes searched for her. The leader stepped forward, his presence commanding yet strangely calm. He removed his helmet, revealing weathered features and sharp eyes that softened as they landed on Rachel. "You Rachel Garner?" She nodded slowly, pulling Evan closer. "Yes." The man extended a hand. "Name's Derek Holt. Walter's my father." Rachel blinked in shock. "Your father?" He's okay." Derek's voice caught slightly. "He's alive because of you." He turned, gesturing to the line of riders behind him. "We don't forget debts like that." Evan squeezed Rachel's arm, whispering, "Mom, they look scary." Derek crouched slightly, his voice dropping gentle as he looked at Evan. "Son, scary's what we look like to bad men. To good folks like you and your mom, we're just family." Engines idled low, the street humming with power, neighbors peeking from windows. Rachel felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from the weight of something she couldn't yet name: protection. Word spread through Maple Hollow faster than wildfire. 100 Hell's Angels parked outside Rachel Garner's home. Some whispered fear, others awe. Rachel stepped onto the porch facing Derek, her voice trembling. "Why are you here?" He met her eyes with steady resolve. "Because you saved my father. And because no one should stand alone after that kind of storm." He looked around the street, raising his voice so neighbors could hear. "This woman is under our watch now. Anybody with a problem can bring it to us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rachel felt her cheeks burn, torn between gratitude and disbelief. She had acted out of simple humanity. Now her small act echoed like thunder. Evan tugged her sleeve, whispering, "They're like angels on bikes, Mum." She smiled faintly, pulling him close. And for the first time since the flood, Rachel realized she wasn't just surviving. She was surrounded. She was shielded. She wasn't alone anymore. The following morning, Maple Hollow buzzed like never before. At the diner, voices clashed over steaming mugs of coffee. Rachel Garner? With bikers on her lawn? One woman scoffed. Another leaned forward, lowering her voice. She saved a man's life. That counts for something. Rachel felt the eyes when she walked into town with Evan, whispers trailing like shadows. At the grocery store, an old friend turned away, but the clerk slipped an extra loaf of bread into her bag, whispering, "For you and the boy." That night, as Rachel scrubbed mud from her porch, the angels remained stationed at the end of her street, engines silent but presence loud. Derek stepped up, offering her a nod. "We'll stick around till things settle." Rachel frowned. "You don't need to—" Derek cut her off gently. "We don't walk away from the people who save our own." Rachel looked at him, realizing this wasn't charity. This was family, just one she had never asked for. Not everyone welcomed the sight of leather and chrome in Maple Hollow. At the council meeting, murmurs rose. "They'll bring trouble. Our kids don't need outlaws in town." Yet no one could deny what they had seen. Rachel's porch untouched, her neighbors safer than ever. Evan, curious, wandered outside one afternoon to see the row of bikes. One angel lifted him onto a Harley, his eyes brightening as he gripped the handlebars. Rachel rushed out, panic flashing, but paused when she saw her son's grin. The biker chuckled. "Don't worry, ma'am. He's just test-driving dreams." Rachel couldn't help but smile. Later, Derek approached quietly. "Folks will talk, let them. The ones worth keeping will see the truth." She met his gaze, surprised by the calm wisdom behind the rough exterior. Slowly, she began to understand. Their presence wasn't about fear. It was about sending a message. Those who stand for others don't stand alone. A week later, as cleanup crews worked through Maple Hollow, Rachel joined volunteers piling sandbags. Sweat streaked her brow, but she kept at it. Some neighbors avoided her eyes. Others offered quiet thanks. When her arms trembled, one of the angels, massive, tattooed, took the bag from her hands with surprising gentleness. "We've got this, ma'am." That evening, she returned home to find fresh groceries stacked neatly on her porch. No note, no explanation. Derek appeared later, leaning against the railing. "Some brothers thought you could use a break." Rachel shook her head, half laughing. "I'm not used to help." Derek's expression softened. "Neither are we. That's why we pay it back tenfold." Rachel sat on the step, Evan curled beside her. For the first time since the flood, she didn't feel like she was carrying the world on her shoulders. The angel's loyalty wasn't just loud, it was steady, silent, woven into every act of kindness. But shadows lingered. One evening, as Rachel closed the curtains, she spotted two unfamiliar men across the street, watching. They weren't townsfolk. She recognized the swagger, the same kind of menace that had always preyed on the vulnerable. Before panic could rise, engines roared to life. Angels stepped forward from the corner, their silhouettes sharp in the lamplight. The strangers melted into the night without a word. Evan, frightened, asked, "Mom, are they bad guys?" Rachel knelt, cupping his cheek. "Bad guys run when good men stand?" Derek came to the porch later, his tone quiet. "Not everyone's happy we're here. But no one touches you. Not while we breathe." Rachel's heart ached at the certainty in his voice. She hadn't realized until then. Saving Walter hadn't just spared one man. It had tethered her family's fate to a brotherhood that wouldn't bend, wouldn't break, and wouldn't let harm near her door. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers in Maple Hollow shifted. At the cafe, people said, "Maybe those bikers aren't what we thought." At church, an old woman patted Rachel's hand. "You did what was right. God doesn't choose the messengers, just the message." Rachel felt the tide turning. Evan brought home a drawing from school. Himself on a Harley, a line of angels around their house. "This is our shield," he explained proudly. That night, Rachel sat with Derek on the porch, the quiet hum of bikes down the street. "I didn't save your father to get this," she murmured. Derek's gaze lingered on the horizon. That's why it matters. Real kindness doesn't expect anything back. And that's the kind we ride for. The words sank deep into Rachel's heart. For the first time, she believed it. Her small act had become something bigger than her. Something that rippled across chrome leather and loyalty. The peace didn't last. One rainy evening, Rachel heard pounding at her door. She froze, Evan clinging to her leg. When she opened it, a man in a suit stood there, umbrella dripping. "Ma'am," he said smoothly, "name's Victor Kane. Some of us don't like outsiders bringing trouble to Maple Hollow. Those bikers make business difficult." His smile was sharp, unfriendly. Rachel stiffened. "They've only protected us." Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Protection comes at a cost. When they leave, and they will, you'll be the one left paying the price." He tipped his hat and vanished into the rain. Rachel's hands trembled. Later that night, she told Derek. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. "Kane's no neighbor. He's got ties to crews who prey on towns like this." Rachel's fear burned into anger. "Why me?" Derek's voice was steady. "Because you proved one person can change everything. And men like him hate that." The following day, Maple Hollow buzzed with rumors of Kane's threats. Some neighbors grew distant, worried his words might be true. Rachel pushed through the stairs, carrying Evan's lunchbox to school. On her way home, she found Derek waiting on her porch. "We need to show them," he said quietly. "Show who?" she asked. He nodded toward the town square. Hours later, engines thundered through Maple Hollow. 100 Harleys lined the streets, vests gleaming, boots heavy on the pavement. At the center stood Rachel, holding Evan's hand. Derek raised his voice, sharp as steel. "This woman saved one of our own. And now anyone who threatens her threatens us all." The crowd gasped, whispers rippling. Rachel felt exposed, her cheeks burning. But when she looked down at Evan, smiling proudly, she realized something. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to all who believed loyalty mattered more than fear. Kane struck back. Late one night, rocks shattered Rachel's windows. Evan screamed as glass rained across the floor. Rachel shielded him with her arms, her heart pounding. By the time she looked outside, a dark car sped away. Within minutes, the roar of Harleys filled the street. Angels poured onto her lawn, weapons ready. Derek pushed through them, eyes fierce. "Are you hurt?" Rachel shook her head, clutching Evan. Anger trembled in her voice. "They came after my son." Derek's hand pressed gently to her shoulder. "Then they just made it personal." The angels fanned out, engines revving, chasing the trail into the night. Rachel sat on the porch, tears streaming silently. Evan leaned against her, whispering, "They came fast, Mom. They're always here." She hugged him tight. For the first time in years, she realized she didn't feel powerless. With every roar of engines in the distance, she felt safer, stronger, and less alone. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Maple Hollow, glinting off broken glass. Rachel expected whispers of pity, but instead found baskets of food, tools, and blankets left on her porch by neighbors. Slowly, the town was changing, seeing her not as a victim, but as a symbol. At the edge of the street, the angels stood tall, leather gleaming, silent and unyielding. Derek approached, a rare smile tugging his lips. "Kane thought he could scare you. Instead, he woke this town up." Rachel looked at the offerings with wide eyes. "I don't deserve this." Derek shook his head firmly. "You earned it the night you pulled my father from the flood. Sometimes one act of courage lights a fire no one can put out." Rachel swallowed hard, feeling her chest swell with something new. Not fear, not burden, pride. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was carrying a torch that others had begun to follow. The final confrontation came days later. Kane arrived in Maple Hollow with a convoy of men, their cars blocking Main Street. He strode out, voice booming. "This ends now. No woman and her biker pets will ruin my business." Before Rachel could react, engines thundered. The angels poured in, 100 strong, surrounding the cars in a circle of chrome and steel. Derek dismounted, his boots echoing against the asphalt. "You don't scare her. And you sure as hell don't scare us." The angels revved in unison, a wall of sound that shook windows and rattled Kane's men until their bravado cracked. Rachel stood on the steps of the hardware store, Evan's hand in hers, voice steady. "You're wrong, Kane. Fear doesn't run this town anymore." The crowd erupted in cheers, neighbors stepping from sidewalks, siding openly with her. Kane's smirk faded as his men retreated, swallowed by the roar of engines. Maple Hollow had chosen, and it wasn't him. When Kane's convoy vanished into the horizon, silence lingered for a heartbeat. Then applause broke through, spreading across Maple Hollow like fire through dry grass. Children clapped, old men cheered, women shouted their gratitude. Rachel stood frozen, Evan pressed against her side, tears shining in her eyes. Derek approached slowly, removing his vest and holding it up high. The angels roared their engines, saluting Rachel as if she were one of their own. Her chest tightened, overwhelmed. Neighbors began stepping forward, offering hugs, shaking her hand, thanking her aloud. For years she had been invisible, just a single mom fighting through each day unnoticed. Now she was something else. A symbol of courage, a reminder of what loyalty could build. As the angels remounted their bikes, Derek leaned close. "You gave my father life. Tonight you gave this town its backbone. Don't forget that." Rachel nodded, whispering, "I won't." For the first time she truly believed it. Life in Maple Hollow slowly returned to rhythm, but the rhythm felt different. At the diner, people no longer whispered. They greeted Rachel warmly, buying Evan sundaes, thanking her in public. The grocery clerk, who once averted his eyes, now asked her advice on rebuilding his flooded basement. Rachel noticed the change most in Evan. He walked taller, smiled brighter, and no longer startled at shadows outside the window. "They're still out there, Mum," he said one evening, drawing rows of motorcycles in his notebook. Rachel smiled softly. "Maybe not parked outside. But yes, they'll always be there." She still spotted chrome now and then, bikes idling on the far end of town, men nodding as they passed her home. They weren't guarding constantly anymore, but their presence lingered, steady as a promise. For Rachel, the flood had nearly drowned her world. But out of it, she had gained something unexpected. Not just protection, but a new kind of family. One crisp Saturday morning, Rachel received a call. Walter Holt's voice cracked with age but carried warmth. "You saved me that night, and I've been wanting to see you again." She drove Evan to the nearby town where Walter lived. When they arrived, he hugged her with surprising strength. "My boy told me what you did here," Walter said, eyes misty. "You didn't just pull me from water, you pulled my son's faith back to the surface." Derek appeared then, nodding quietly at his father. Evan darted forward, asking Walter to tell flood stories again. As the old man laughed, Rachel watched Derek watching his father, and she realized this story was bigger than her. Her one act of kindness had healed wounds she never saw. Between father and son, between bikers and a town, between fear and courage. And it struck her, kindness, when carried far enough, could ripple into places even storms couldn't touch. Months later, Maple Hollow held its annual harvest fair. For the first time since the flood, laughter rang unbroken. Rachel worked a small booth with Evan, selling homemade pies. Suddenly the ground trembled, the familiar growl of Harleys. Heads turned as dozens of angels rode into town, chrome gleaming beneath golden leaves. This time, no one muttered fear. Children ran forward, waving, cheering. Derek parked front and center, lifting Evan high onto his shoulders. The fair erupted in applause as Rachel smiled, overwhelmed. Grisly banners were absent. It wasn't about claiming territory. It was about celebrating a bond forged in floodwaters and defended in fire. Derek placed a small leather patch on Rachel's booth, embroidered with 2 words, family first. She held it close, tears filling her eyes. For years, she had wondered if she and Evan belonged anywhere. That day, she knew the answer. They belonged here, in courage, in loyalty, in the roar of engines that now felt like home. On a quiet autumn evening, Rachel tucked Evan into bed. Outside, the hum of engines drifted faintly through the hills, not near but never far. She stepped onto the porch, the cool air filling her lungs. She touched the patch on her coat, remembering Derek's words, Walter's gratitude, and the sight of her neighbors clapping as the angels stood watch. She realized now that storms come to test, not to break, and sometimes kindness is the only bridge that carries people across. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, "We're not alone anymore." A lone Harley rumbled past in the distance, its rider lifting a hand in silent salute. Rachel returned the gesture, her heart steady. The flood had taken much, but it had given more. She wasn't just a single mom anymore. She was proof that even the smallest act of humanity could summon an army of loyalty, and that truth would outlast any storm. When one act of kindness saved a man, loyalty turned it into an unbreakable bond.